Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I am president and COO at UNIFI Labs, which is a software company that delivers cloud-based content management to some of the world's leading AECO organizations. So that is from design firms like Stantec and ARUP to owners like Walgreens and Wegmans. And our vision and what we're working towards is helping enable fluid data collaboration across building industry stakeholders by enabling common data environments for our customers. So the company was founded over 10 years ago by two industry veterans who helped build up the Las Vegas Strip. As you can imagine, that included a lot of very complex projects. And it was the early days of BIM when they were doing that. So they quickly recognized the inefficiency of having to rebuild BIM content over and over again across projects and founded UNIFI to help build a better now and also enable a better built future for the industry. I myself came to UNIFI about 5 years ago now, and I was lucky enough to start my career out in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. Very quickly discovered my passion is helping great products find customers more quickly so that they can scale up and change and improve as many lives as possible. So I felt very fortunate when I found UNIFI. It has a great product, and they really just needed a little bit of help making sure we could get the word out there about UNIFI and how we're able to help our customers. To help break down BIM content a bit further, you can think about it as virtual assets. So it's a virtual representation of all the components that go into a building, from HVAC systems to walls and flooring to furniture like desks and chairs. So these virtual assets are made up of two components, the geometry and the data, and we help our customers drive efficiency by making sure those assets don't have to be recreated for every project. They can actually be reused and shared with other stakeholders to help drive efficiency within the building lifecycle.
Yeah, there's a lot of really important things you bring up. And I understand England, where you are right now, is really leading the world. And you've had BIM really mandated from a regulatory point of view for some time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that definitely is right. London and the UK in general has done a really good job of setting mandates at the country level on government projects, which has helped kind of drive the private sector projects along as well. So there are a couple of different standards, including IFC and COBE, as well as ISO 19650, which we've seen be broadly adopted in the UK. In general, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm American myself, as is UNIFI is based in the US, and we definitely see that in the UK, Australia, and then Europe in general. They're further ahead of where we are in terms of generally accepted standards in the US because of those government mandates. And hopefully we'll get our act together in the US one of these days as well. Having those standards mandated really does help move the industry forward. And it also, another big driver we see in getting customers to a point where they're all working off a single model and have an integrated project plan is the desire to really have a I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Let me start over. The other driving factor we see in having customers working off an integrated project plan and working off a single model is what the client themselves is asking for, right? Of course, at the end of the day, client is king. We say that at UNIFI, and we definitely see that in the AECO industry. And that's another area and trend that we actually see moving the industry forward right now, that owners themselves, and not just government organizations, are looking for specific data. They expect to be able to actually make decisions and leverage the BIM data throughout the operations phase of the building life cycle. And as owners become more sophisticated, And they're not just saying, okay, here's a BIM model, we'll save it on our on our computer here and never come back to it because we don't actually know how to get any value from this. They're getting much more sophisticated, and that's definitely driving the AECs to be able to deliver a more informed and well-built model as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you have any examples where clients are starting to use generated building data? I mean, one that just comes to mind is the value in disassembling a building, but I'm probably biased towards structural products. What sort of data are clients being able to use throughout the building life?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's tons of examples there, and I think there continues to be kind of, if only we could do this. I think there's a lot of expectation for BIM, and we are actually starting to see that certain organizations are actually beginning to realize value in the operations phase. One thing, just to take a step back and provide a little bit of context on, our belief at UNIFI and in the full value of BIM is that it really isn't going to be realized until owners are able to leverage the data during the operations phase. This might be a stat you've heard before, but only about 10 to 20% of the cost of a building's life cycle takes place in the construction phase. The vast majority of it actually happens during the operations phase when you think about things like energy use, water, all of that happens, maintenance that happens during that operations phase. So I think in terms of how BIM data is actually being used in that operations phase, we definitely see BIM models being used to influence how energy will be used in the building. So thinking about how you can build out the lighting systems and plans so that they take advantage of the natural sunlight patterns that a building will receive during its life cycle. That's a really good example on the energy sustainability front. I think another big opportunity we see where certain owners are starting to actually realize this is you brought up manufacturers, products and their virtual assets, and actually being able to manage the warranty information and get an understanding. And you sometimes, in certain cases, even use sensors to say, hey, we think this HVAC system should last 20 years. Are we seeing any signs of issues where it may actually need to be serviced or replaced earlier? And that really does help drive actionable and improvements within the operations phase, where owners are able to really start to drive efficiency and actually complete preventative maintenance that keeps them from a really a really big problem that they weren't expecting only 5 years into the life cycle of a building, for example.
Yeah, a lot in our conversation we've been talking about like 2D in terms of parts and eliminating wastage in that sense, but can we move into, say, three-dimensional cases where you're actually saving whole sections of buildings, right? So we're moving sort of into that kit of parts space with taking things from one model and bringing it to another, but whole parts of buildings.
Yeah, 100%. That's definitely that's another great example in itself. And that idea of being able to use the three-dimensional model or version of a space is actually becoming more important right now as we really see the future of the workplace in question. As you can imagine, there's a lot of companies out there with large office spaces, which they may or may not look to maintain moving forwards, or they're at least needing to update for perhaps a more virtual workforce that's only in the office a day or two a week. So there's this concept you might have, I'm sure you've come across this before, that is really taking off around a digital twin, which is essentially saying, in addition to what we have with the physical building, we want a digital twin that mirrors that physical building exactly. So as changes happen to the physical building, you want that actually mirrored within the digital twin. And having that digital twin also enables better planning around, hey, we want to update this workspace from having 200 people in the office every day to having 50 people in the office every day because they're only in once a week. And it can make it a lot easier to be able to visualize how you can be updating that space to make it more usable. We see this a lot in the retail space as well. I mentioned one of our customers in Walgreens, and they've showed us how BIM and the idea of a digital twin of their stores helps them better plan out future store layouts, so that instead of thinking about a store layout, then actually seeing it in reality and going, oh, this is not going to be good for customers, they can experience a few of those different layouts virtually, leveraging other add-ins, including UNIFI like Enscape, to visualize that space. And that gives them much more confidence that, yes, this is the layout we want, and we're not going to have to go through actually building the physical space out 2 or 3 times before we figure out what we really like.
There's been a few buzzwords and acronyms in building information modeling. It itself is one of them. Is there any other sort of buzzwords or terms that sort of get you excited? I mean, there's a lot of items or a lot of concepts really emerging in this space.
Yeah, that's digital twin is up there with BIM as one of the new buzzwords of the industry. There's no doubt there. I think another term that's getting thrown around a lot is computational and generative design. So that actually ties back to that idea of here's a space. Let me give you some information about the space and the fact that maybe I want 20 employees working there, and then the program will actually spit out maybe 20 different ways you could set up that space. So instead of a poor modeler having to sit there and come up with 20 versions themselves, the computer can take care of that for you. And I think what's exciting about both the digital twin and this idea of generative design is that they're really starting to take advantage of all the data that has been generated through BIM and starting to automate some of those more painful processes, or help make better decisions about a space based on past information. So whether a past project was a success or a failure, these new trends really allow us to take advantage of that data. And I think that helps the industry start to realize what the value of all the time they've been investing in building these virtual models out is, because to some extent, it can feel like a lot of pain up front for very little gain. And I think now we're getting to the point where there's so much data that it's more of a question of how do we actually start to make this actionable, and use it to help us make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, generative modeling and generative design and computational design is a really exciting space to be in. But when I try and figure it out myself, where to go online and where to start, it's really hard to figure that sort of stuff out. There's a few startups in Australia who are doing it, but how do you recommend sort of getting your hands dirty with these sort of things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do know, when it comes to the ability to just get started, in the past, we definitely have seen that you need to have a little familiarity with coding or be somewhat code savvy to be able to leverage some of these tools. I think right now, for the most cutting edge tools, there is still a little bit of, and this is why we see design technologists in firms really carrying the torch forward on these different initiatives, because you do need that level of expertise. I think at the same time, though, what you just mentioned around making it easier for let's call them, we refer to them sometimes as non-technical stakeholders at UNIFI. So it's the idea that we see this especially when you think about some of the senior subject matter experts at our firms who have really been completely removed from the modeling workflow, right? You've got these maybe 20 or 30 something digital natives who are coming in. They're responsible for building out the 3D models, the BIM models, and all of a sudden maybe the 40 or 50-year-old who has had their head kicked in on a job site for the past 20 years is really unable to engage in that workflow. So that's one of those workflows that we look at as a little bit broken today. I think there's this generational shift happening, and what we're really working towards at UNIFI is helping expose and make that BIM model more transparent so that every stakeholder can come together and re-engage on it. You don't have to know how to use Revit or know how to code in order to have input into the model and the way the space is getting built out. So I think I gave a roundabout answer to your question. I think that people are starting to recognize that issue and try to make these technologies more accessible. At the same time, there's definitely work to be done there, I think.
Virginia, I've loved having you on this podcast speaking about these exciting topics. Is there anything else in construction that is on the horizon that really gets you excited?
Yeah. So I'd start answering this question by admitting I myself, I've spent my career, as I mentioned, in the software and technology space. And until I came to UNIFI, I actually had little to no exposure to the construction and building industry. So it was a fascinating learning experience. And I've really fallen in love with what I feel like is a very complex and sometimes misunderstood industry. I hear from when I'm interacting with stakeholders outside the industry, whether it be investors or potential partners who are less familiar with the building industry, you hear a lot that, oh, the building industry is a little backwards. And, there's a lot of, well, that's the way we've always done it. And so we're going to keep doing it that way. And to be honest, as I've interacted with our customers and stakeholders at large in the industry, I've really seen that it's not an anti-technology industry per se. It's an industry that needs technology that's going to work for them today. So that's something that we think a lot about at UNIFI is, yes, in the long term, there is opportunity and need for major workflow overhauls. And at the same time, you've got to start by delivering value within the workflows that exist today. Because one of the most important I think measurements in the industry is velocity on a project, right? This is a service business. You're working on deadlines on a timeline. And so if all of a sudden you're expected to bring in a new technology that's going to slow down that timeline, by half, or is actually going to require you to pause on the job and take a couple of months to learn the technology before it can add value, that's just not going to work for the industry. So that's something we really think about at UNIFI. And I think that's something in the industry at large that we believe needs to continue to be taken into consideration is we all as technology providers need to be working towards that long-term utopia of whatever it might be. For us, it's enabling that fluid data environment, that common data environment. And at the same time, we actually have to be breaking that down to incremental improvement so that we're not asking our customers to go from 0 to 100 and take 2 years to rebuild all their workflows and start getting value from there.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on the podcast.
Cool. Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure to be on the podcast. Really appreciate you having us. And yeah, we're big fans of Wood Solutions and look forward to keeping in touch in the future.